warmly. This meeting is being recorded, by the way, so be careful what you say. I'm really privileged to be here. I'm the executive director of the New York Artists Equity Association and Equity Gallery. And we have been in existence since 1947. And we were primarily founded for artists to help emerging artists. So we were doing emerging before anybody knew what emerging was, and to build equity, to give people a leg up, right? So they could be showcased. And artists emerge at all points in their career. So one of the things that you get when you're an artist member, and we're a membership association, is the benefit to curate art shows in our gallery. And I realized that, hard to say, but they weren't as good as I really wanted. They were sort of missing the mark. So 2 years ago, I came up with the idea to do these curatorial workshops. We would bring artists that wanted to sort of build up their curatorial practice, and we would get leaders, and we would launch curatorial residencies, right? And we did call for entries, artists applied, and we pulled together what we thought was a good cohort. And the first one we did was wonderful, and it got reviewed in Artsy. And on that committee was Haley Ferber, who is the deputy director of Shoshama, which, as most of you know or may not know, finds space for artists to be in studios and to do their work. What I did was I decided we should do this again, because this is a lovely thing. And we're going to continue doing this again. So, because it's what we're meant to do, right? We're meant to be a service and to help the artist community and sort of expand practice. So that's my little bit about equity. We were founded by Jacob Lawrence and his wife, Gwendolyn Knight. And they gave us a substantial gift of funding so that we could keep our association going and to have a gallery. And we continue on that mission. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over this panel to Haley, who is, by the way, is an Emerald member. That's a wonderful thing to be at Equity Gallery. That means, if you're Irish, it means all sorts of things. But really what it means is she gives undying service to this association, tireless in what she does for this organization. And Haley is one of the leaders in this curatorial program. Again, that will continue. And if you want to know more about it, because we're going to do it next year, you should email Haley and let her know that you're interested. And maybe we can get even some of our panelists to join in next year to help with that. And also the leader was Luciana Solano, who actually is a trustee, which means I call on her even more. And she even gives more service and time, and just really charitable with her giving and her expertise on curatorial practice. And what she's done with this curator group is a show that's open now, but I'm gonna let Haley talk more about it, but come see it if you can. And one painting in particular really inspired this panel to come talk in depth about the thread that they're seeing in this collection of works. And I think it's really important that we listen tonight and hear what they have to say about it and make us think deeply about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, thank you so much. I hope you all become members of Equity Artists Association. We're doing very good work. And we're doing it outside the marketplace. We're doing it because we must. Okay, Haley, that was totally off script, but hey, I only had one Diet Coke today. I should have 3. I love you, and please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's nice to have you all. As Michael mentioned, my name is Haley. I'm Deputy Director of Shoshama and also an Emerald member at Equity Gallery. I was part of the original cohort who learned the curatorial practice as a group. And then Michael invited me back to co-lead this session with Luciana Solano. And I'm excited to be here and tell you a little more about it. So welcome to tonight's panel, Title X. This is an event in response to Only If We Wish To, an exhibition that was curated by Shane Allen, Cecilia Andre, Hadassah Bachman, Shwarga Bhattacharjee, Gosha Karpowitz, A. Morgan McKendry, and Allison Peary as part of the NYEA Curatorial Residency Program. Only If We Wish To brings together 15 artists of various backgrounds, united by works that decontextualize and undress the layered complexities that center around forms, systems, bodies, freedom, and communal empathy. Each work is a relic, marking a different moment in time, a place on the map, or an expression of feelings. And please, sorry, before we go on, if you are not on mute, please mute yourself. Thank you. Okay, each work is a relic, marking a different moment in time, a place on a map, or an expression of the human form, coming together to create a collective sense of understanding of our shared and disparate experiences. The artists included in this exhibition are Nir Ariely, Adalja Campos, Lucille Collin, Anna Cohn, Myri Delaney, Jen Dwyer, Evihe Edry, Ahmed Kishore, Dawn Kremlik, Jessica Mathieu, Yeji Moon, Chris Rock, Diana Schmertz, Natasha Volyavsky, and Rachel Wren. This talk centers around one of the title pieces in our show called Title X by artist, sorry, excuse me a second, I'm a little under the weather, by artist Diana Schmertz. It referencing a federal civil rights law in the United States of America that was passed as part of the Education Amendments of 1972. This prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or other education program that receives federal money. I'm going to do a quick intro of our moderator and panelists and then let them take it away. So tonight's moderator, Nicole Hebron, is Associate Professor of Art at Chapman University, an interdisciplinary artist, founder and director of the Situation Room and Gallery Tally Poster Project. Her practice includes studio work, curating, writing, social media, crowdsourcing, teaching, public speaking, and both individual and collaborative projects. She's been engaged in individual and collaborative projects in Los Angeles since 1992. Dr. Sheila Leaders is one of our panelists this evening. Her political and scholarly commitment to gender equality in all aspects of life began in the 1960s, when as a graduate student, she was elected the first president of the Buffalo, New York chapter of NOW. Then in Ithaca, New York, she negotiated the creation of the first women's studies program at Cornell University, where she served on the advisory committee and taught original courses on women in politics. She also served as the first national treasurer of the Women's Caucus of the American Political Science Association. As a researcher at the Center for the American Women in Politics at Rutgers University, she published a study comparing women candidates for election to the New Jersey legislature with their male opponents. Dr. Leader was a staff member of the National Commission on the Observance of International Women's Year from 1975 to 1977, and wrote workshop guides on a broad range of women's issues for use at a congressionally mandated public meetings in every state and territory. These meetings were attended by some 150,000 women who debated the issues and voted on recommendations, including the topic of women and the arts. Among her responsibilities for the historic 1977 National Women's Conference in Houston was organizing a free feminist film festival for the estimated 20,000 attendees. She's co-author of American Women on the Move. Her papers are at Radcliffe Schlesinger Library, and her video feminist history can be seen at veteranfeministsofamerica.org as part of the Pioneer Histories Project. We also have artist Diana Schmertz, who is an artist who exhibits internationally, having shown at Smack Mellon, Center for Book Arts, Muriel Guipin Gallery, and Columbia University in New York City, the International Museum of Women, San Francisco and Gallery Nacional, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. She completed 2 Masters of Science and received grants and awards from organizations such as the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, Northern Manhattan Arts, Alara Emerge, and the Drawing Center. And finally, we have Luciana Solano, a trustee of equity and co-leader of the Curatorial Residency program. She is also an independent curator and art consultant based in New York and Rio de Janeiro. Her multidisciplinary projects focus on the intersection between art, science, and language in contemporary environments. I will paste all of these bios in the chat so that you can read them a little more closely and see them in their full length. Please save all questions you have till the end. Feel free you can enter them in the chat, and at the end of the talk, we will go through them and ask some questions. And please remember to keep yourself on mute if you are not speaking. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and I will pass it over to Micol.
Thanks so much, Haley. Wow, talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, I'm feeling a little fluttery listening to that. I know we had, we weren't necessarily going to read out all the bios, but I'm so glad that you did, because what incredible accomplishments our panelists have. We are here on June 23rd, the 49th anniversary of the passing of Title IX and the 50th anniversary of the drafting of the legislation of Title IX. And it's a pretty exciting anniversary, I think. As Haley and Micol mentioned, we're here to talk about Title IX, where we are now, where we've come, and where we still have to go. I think there is still some work to go, but there are also some pretty incredible examples of people and artists such as Equity Gallery and Diana Schmertz, and our curators for Only If We Wish To, who are doing some really important work with regard to representation in the arts. I also want to thank Allison Pyrie for inviting me to be a moderator on this. She's just concluding the curatorial residency at Equity Gallery. I won't take too much more time. Let me share my screen. So we're first going to hear from Dr. Leader, and then we're going to hear from Diana and then Luciana. Dr. Leader is going to offer us a little bit of historical context. Let me just come in here, because as you heard, she's got an incredible history. So we have, I had my, this is just our little leader page, and we'll start with Patsy and Edith. Dr. Leader, if you don't mind, take it away.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. This is indeed a very important milestone in the history of legal changes that broaden opportunities for women in education at all levels. Pepsi Mink is a really important pioneer feminist. She was the initial sponsor of Title IX, and having been elected to Congress in 1964 from the state of Hawaii, where she had previously been elected to the state legislature, her admission to Congress represented the first time an Asian American and a woman of color was in Congress. She was appointed to serve on the Education Committee in Congress, and she drafted the proposed legislation, and with the co-sponsorship of another female member of Congress from Oregon, who had preceded her into Congress, Edith Green of Oregon, the two of them put their heads together, used their limited power of persuasion to overcome very strong objections by several powerful male members of Congress who were worried that if Title IX were in fact enacted into law, it would siphon money from male sports, particularly football and basketball, which were important revenue sources for high schools and colleges. So I think it's really important to understand and to recognize that it matters who represents us. And having feminists, male and female, in all elective and appointive offices in America is critical for passage of progressive laws. So we owe them an enormous thanks. Next slide. So this is actually the text of the law. It was passed by Congress in 1971. So in fact, it's 50 years old, but passage of a law by Congress is just the first step. The next critical step is the executive branch that's responsible for implementing the law has to draw up regulations that actually explains what the law requires. And that initial responsibility fell to what was then the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. It was the Office of Civil Rights that had that initial responsibility. And then it was transferred over to the subsequent Department of Education. And as you may be aware, under the previous president, the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, was not at all sympathetic to the goals and aims of Title IX and tried to undo the regulations or to weaken them, particularly when it came to sexual harassment in schools. So again, it matters who's in government, and it's really important that progressive interest groups hold the policymakers' feet to the fire to make sure they don't backslide when it comes to implementing the original intent of the law. Next slide, please. The next important milestone is that Congresswoman Bella Abzug of New York persuaded Congress to extend the life of the National Commission on the Observance of International Women's Year, which was founded by President Nixon in 1975, to extend its mandate and to appropriate funds for holding public meetings in every state and territory, open to anybody who wanted to go, to debate the issues of concern to women at that time, to attend workshops, and to draft and vote on resolutions on a vast range of issues, and to elect their representatives to attend the first National Women's Conference, which was held in Houston in November of 1977. I served as a staff member on that commission. 150,000 women and men attended all the public meetings in all the states and territories, sent their elected delegates to Houston, and resolutions on a broad range of issues, including women in the arts, were voted on in public meetings that were broadcast and carried on PBS stations around this country. This is the cover of the final report to the President of Congress. It shows women carrying the Olympic torch that went all the way from Seneca Falls, New York to Houston. When this report was published by the government printing office, 150,000 copies were purchased from the government. I think it probably makes it the best-selling government report of all times. Next slide, please. 40 years later, my colleague on the staff of the commission, Pat Hyatt, and I worried that people had forgotten this historic event. And so we wrote a book describing from the inside these historic events, the meetings, the state meetings and the national meetings, the antis, the Phyllis Schlafly effort to stop us all, as well as a summary of where we were as of 2017. I want to say that with respect to women in the arts, the Free Feminist Film Festival that I organized for the 20,000 people who came for free to the Houston Convention Center included a documentary film about Alice Neal. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that close to 50 years later, her work is finally being shown at the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City. It's a blockbuster, and my only regret is that she did not live to see her work showcased at the Met, where it is bringing in enormous crowds. So you have to persist. That's the final message. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leader. I hope that everybody orders your book right now. Let's surpass the report of the conference. Let's get 155,000 orders to that book.
Thank you. You can get it on Amazon, I think.
And I think we might also have a link for people to be able to buy that. You can get it on Amazon. I ordered mine as soon as I heard about it from you.
It's so sweet. Thank you.
To get it. And I actually really encourage everyone else to order it too. I hadn't known any details about the Women's Conference in 1977, and doing a little bit of preliminary research, I was just blown away with the amount of issues that were addressed and covered, and the organizing. And that's something that I really appreciate from you, is kind of reminding us how important it is to organize and collaborate. And that's something that I see echoed at Equity Gallery and in this exhibition and in the curatorial residency. This idea of really working together is it's so crucial. Like, we cannot do it alone. And so I really appreciate you and Equity for kind of leading reminding us of that and leading the way. You brought up that there, how important representation is. And we just saw, last week, President Biden trying to overturn the Trump mandate to exclude trans students from Title IX. And I think that's a really encouraging step forward too. So thank you very much for that historical overview and for your book. And also next up, we have Diana Schmertz talking about her piece Title IX, which is in fact a painting, but it's more than a painting. It's an interdisciplinary painting, and she'll tell you about that. And I have some questions for you too as you go.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Equity Gallery, for having me in this show, all the curators that put it together, and especially Dosha for bringing me directly in. And I'm very excited to be on this panel with Micol and Sheila and Luciana. I am all about having these great intellectual discussions. They fuel my work. And I think it's really important for us to talk about these things, as Sheila said, persist, persist, persist. And I believe that we have to come together as a group, the way the curators did, the way the panel is coming together as a group to really help each other. And I think that you could see that from the visual imagery represented in my painting here. So just a little bit about my work before I explain the painting. All of my work is about people's perspectives and hope. And I'm really interested in the social agreements that we all come to, whether they're laws or contracts or just, we cross the street at the crosswalk because we all agree this is a positive social agreement not to get run over, even though I live in New York City and jaywalk all the time. But we have these positive social agreements. So this image is representing the social agreement of Title IX. What I did, you don't need to know the backstory of this image, but I think that it's important to understand sort of what inspired me. I have a bunch of students. I work in high school. I teach art. Teaching art is just as important to me as being an artist. I feel like an activist for both, because I'm trying to help people learn to express themselves and communicate with each other and open dialogue. And so these people in this image, the woman or young lady bringing up the younger students is actually, she was a senior, she graduated, and she was the senior role model for the track team. And people really looked up to her. And the way my school works with sports is there's usually seniors or older students who help the coach out and help role model and elevate for the younger students. And so the younger people in this image all identify as female. And so she's raising them up. I didn't necessarily feel the need to have a coach or a teacher specifically, because I think education, whether it's formal or informal, is what elevates people. So I really wanted to, all of my models, I want to have a personal connection with them so that I can evoke emotion. The more emotion I feel, the better able I am to evoke compassion and emotion. Can you switch to the other slide for a minute? So then when you look up close to my paintings, you'll see that I laser cut text into them. So this is literally the Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, as you can read if you start from the top. If you wanted to, you could take the time to read the entire amendment or amendments. And what I do to make this text is I have to use Illustrator software to make a file that tells a laser cutting machine where to cut, where to burn the paper. And so it cuts the negative space out of the paper and creating an object that's completely made out of words. And I love this idea conceptually out of the paper being made out of words, and that the machine has to burn it in order to get these spaces. For me, it represents the idea that, you know, we have to struggle and sacrifice a lot to come to certain agreements to make our society better. And we do have to persevere and, you know, work really hard and vote for the right people and make sure that they like are representing us correctly to have these agreements, not only come into law or, you know, agreed upon in society, but for them to stay. As Micol said, you know, Trump stripped away some of the rights for Title IX, and now Biden is trying to fight back to have the inclusion of LGBTQ community, which I am very excited about. We need to protect everybody. I 100% believe education is the way to elevate people. I'm sure there are lots of other ways, but personally, I grew up really poor, and it was because I got into schools and was able to educate myself both in school and on my own that I feel like I've been able to be successful in my life. So that is what I'm trying to do, and basically start a dialogue and have hope.
Diana, thank you so much. I have a couple of things I wanted to bring up that we've talked about a little bit before, but also that are coming up as I'm looking at this again and listening to you talk. One is that, you know, so famous and so dear to me slogan, the personal is political. And I look at your work and I see, you know, I see this very personal connection with your students, with the process of art making. I mean, I think watercolor is such an intimate, you know, painting and burning into this paper, it's a very intimate process.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, it exemplifies that dictum really beautifully, but it also reminds me of when I was young, my mother, like I was born in the 70s. And so my mother kind of lived through the second wave, wasn't nearly as active as say Dr. Leader was, but she was a little bit there. And she used to wear a button that said, keep your laws off my body. And that was my introduction to a political consciousness, a feminist political consciousness. And I'm looking at this and I see your piece and I'm like, wow, the law is literally on the body. And I think about kind of, you know, laws and feminism being written literally and writ large, like on our bodies. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit more. You mentioned how much you like to integrate both the emotional and the intellectual. And
yeah, I love that that your mother had that button, and I agree with it. Yet at the same time, I feel like the laws are written on our bodies, whether we choose to or not. And so I try to take that idea even further. But first, I'll just address the idea of the emotional and the intellectual. I feel that people tend to approach the world either emotionally or intellectually. And I think we really need to approach things in a balanced way between emotion and intellect. And on one hand, like, you don't have to have a balance with that. Like, anyone can view my work and they can connect with it on an emotional level through the visual imagery of the bodies, or they can develop compassion by reading the text on an intellectual level. But I do like to balance both. And I think that if we have a balance of the two, we will get further. But written agreements are really important in our society. Most people in this country think the Equal Rights Amendment is actually an amendment in the Constitution. Latest I read was over 80% of the country thinks it's an actual amendment. And I have female friends that are Republican, and they don't realize that all of the Republicans or Congress are fighting right now for it not to become an official amendment, because the amount of states needed to ratify it have finally done it. And I don't think that they completely understand that their representatives are keeping them from having official equal rights. So with this idea of text, I want, and like it written on the body, I want people to understand that it is part of you. And so you don't see this approach with this piece hung the way it's hung in this gallery, but I have had works, like I had the Constitution hung at Smack Melon, where it's hung in the middle of the room. And that piece is 9 foot long, and it's the Constitution. And I've hung it in like 5 other places too. And you could look at the paintings on either side, but the way the light hits the piece, the shadow of the words fall on the body. So the idea of that is that you become one with this social contract as you engage with the painting. And whether we like it or not, we are one with the contract. And if you're an American citizen, you are born into that contract, and there's no changing that. And the contract I was born into, I don't technically have equal rights, and that's really upsetting to me. But when I did take this one, this is a positive social contract that we do have that hopefully we can work forwards with, and hopefully we'll get the Equal Rights Amendment passed.
I really hope so. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like the law, we want the laws written on our bodies to be the positive ones, right? The
Yeah.
expansive, the ones that protect us, not that exclude us and not that hurt us.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to come back and ask you some more questions in the Q&A at the end.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Luciana Solano, who is our curator and art consultant from Equity Gallery, and she's going to talk about kind of the importance of representation, the way things are getting better, we hope, and what kind of gestures we can make in the art world to help move things in the right direction. Luciana.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for the introduction. We have, I'll do a little recap because Michael and Haley talked about it in the very beginning. This is the second time Equity Gallery is doing its spring curatorial residency program. And both of them were headed by Haley Ferber. And this year I joined her, and we worked together with the main agenda to capacitate artists in curatorial practices. And this is something that's one of the mandates in Equity Gallery, where I serve as a trustee. I'm sorry. Oh, thank you, sorry. So this spring we had 7 artists, Allison Perry, Hadassah Backman, A. Morgan McKendry, Cecilia Andre, Shane Allen, Gosha Karpovics, Shwarga Bhattacharjee, and this group collaborated from March to June, discussing themes, title, choosing the body of work that ended up being only if we wish to. They worked on a PR, a price list, design invitations, social media posts. They handled shipping, artwork drop-off, art placement that we started virtually and then did it in place in the gallery space. It was a big collaboration. And curators collaborated in groups and at times individually. They worked with each other, finding the strengths each one could work with. So one of the results is this panel itself. This is a result of the work of 2 of the curators, Goshen and Allison, invited Nicole Hebron and Dr.Shelah Leaders to remember and discuss Title IX and how it changed and keeps challenging the history of gender in the US. They also invited Diana Schmertz, whose work reminds us how art can engage society around political themes, as she just described to us with the ideas of hope and engagement. Can we see the next slide, please? So I think we can, Micol, I think we can then describe the scenario. I can start with the positive ones. So we have Simone Lee representing the US in the next year Venice Biennale, which is great news, not only for gender, but also for race. While preparing for this, we had discussions on how certain exhibitions were important, like the Radical Women that started in the Hammer Museum in LA, traveled to New York to the Brooklyn Museum, and then to the Pinacoteca in São Paulo. And that was the first survey of radical and feminist art practice covering American art and Latin America. And after that, we saw a number of exhibitions and solo shows of many of the female artists that we saw there, like Zilia Sanchez, the Cuban here in the El Museo del Barrio. We have Marisol's exhibition in the War Museum coming. We had the international show of Claudia Anduja on the indigenous Yanomami people. Claudia Anduja was born in Switzerland and lives in Brazil and works mainly in Brazil. So that was organized and traveled. So we saw, it was very positive. But this image we have on screen shows us we could use more.
Thank you. Let me stop sharing for a quick second, and then I can jump over maybe to some of the number stats if you're interested in like the sales prices of works. As we all know that we're still kind of up against a pretty serious wage gap in the art world. With regard, oops, and I just lost it. So maybe.
Yeah, especially in, so this is representation and who we can see having space to show the work and being taken very serious in beautiful big shows. The market itself, in the art fairs, we've been seeing a lot of female artists. The prices are going up. We can, I have a diagram, when you find it, with one of like a drastic example, which is Julie Meritu, and how the prices are really peaking. This makes the collectors want to consider acquiring more works from female artists, which is very positive to the ecosystem. And we see also many women who were overlooked having opportunity to show their works. So this is how the market looks now, and it's very positive. But we have the other side of the numbers, which is still not comparable with men in art.
Yeah, we're seeing, I mean, our artists like Meritu are doing an incredible job leading the way for us. And as you mentioned, I think Simone Lee representing the US at the next Venice Biennale. We had talked about some of these incredible stats when you start to compare kind of the most, you know, the most ever, like the top selling painting ever by a male and a female artist. You can see this is actually the second most expensive, Willem de Kooning at 303 to Joan Mitchell's 11.9 million. Or even by contemporary artist, Jeff Koons at 91 million compared to Jenny Saville, who is the top selling female painter alive at 12.4 million. Or even if we compare similar media with sculpture, say, Louise Bourgeois comes in at 28.2, still only a fraction, a fifth, say, of what Koons made. Oops, I didn't mean to go back there. We didn't need to jump to that. So
in a positive note too, we had last week Christy doing an auction in Paris, dedicated, the first one dedicated only for women. But there is still a lot of resistance, but I feel we're moving forward. Persistence, like Dr. Leaders said.
And I think, as you pointed out, Luciana, the importance of empowering women artists to be curators, as you have done with the program here at Equity Gallery, is crucial. I think it gives women artists like a role in it, like a literal voice in kind of determining the conversations that are happening in galleries and in museums. So I think
that's correct. And for this show, we had 2 art handlers, and it was a woman and a man, which also gives you the idea that you can get a hammer if you're not familiar. You go close to her, you check how she's working, you see if it's different, because we had a very heavy piece that the male art handler was holding, and that was okay too, that it was easier for him to hold that piece. So having all the curators understanding that in place, and also understanding how a collaboration can empower them. And in our last message to this workshop was to give them the idea, what if we had to do everything we did had to be done for this show to happen. If you have to do everything, it's going to be very complicated. So curating a show is a beautiful collaboration.
Thank you. That's a really great place, I think, to end this part of our panel, and maybe a good opportunity to segue into some questions from the audience, if my panelists are okay with that, kind of continuing this theme of collaboration, reputation, the importance of working collaboratively and collectively. Also, do you have any questions for Dr. Leader, Luciana, Diana?
Yeah, please put any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. Micol.
Hi, I'm thrilled, and I just want to share a bit of an experience I have as a dealer too, in selling work, and the rough job I have trying to get collectors to purchase works specifically by mid-career female artists, which I think is not, they're looking to make a bet, and I compare that to sort of a young up and coming dude, and it's an easier sell. And my question is, how do we as a group empower female patrons, right? So I don't know the answer to that. I've done a lot to try to, Equity Gallery, our membership is 70% women, and our board is 80% women. So, we're doing all we can to sort of get representation on that level, but the patron level is really where change needs to be happening. And these are other women making those decisions, because they're telling the husband to open the checkbook, right? They're calling, I know this sounds horrible and you're gonna hate me for this, but the women come into the gallery, they choose the work, or whether, this isn't all the time, but it's often the case, right? And so how do we get the word out to, how do we educate, patrons so that they are doing that? I think that's the next step. Is it classes? I'm just going to throw that out there. And I know it sounds terribly prejudiced, but I don't mean it that way. I'm just saying this is my lived experience. This is what I see happen. That they don't think it's a good bet. They don't think and they need to be, take care of each other, Anyway, so that's just a thought. If everybody wants to address.
I can jump in. I think that's exactly what the market is doing in terms of doing these graphs. That personally is a little to see an artwork in terms of the how it will evaluate and not how you want to deal with that. For me, it's a little complicated still with all the storage and all how we are living now in collections. But when I think there is a curve where people will start drop down the biases. So for example, if there are very expensive works by female artists, unfortunately they become desirable for the price tag. It is what it is. So I think we are in the process of making it available, but the truth is many collectors do not engage necessarily with the work, but want to know where that is going. So there are all sorts of collections.
I have a few more stats to throw at this. Less than 5% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are female. I think part of the issue is looking at capitalism and the wage gap, right? Like distribution of wealth. So if you're going to be demanding or expecting or hoping for female collectors to be buying more, they need to get more money. Like we need to give them more money, period. Like the world, capitalism, is that we need to distribute wealth a little bit more evenly if we're going to have that expectation. Otherwise, it reads like the pink tax, right? It's like, well, where are the women kind of picking up the slack, but we don't even have we don't have the money to pick up the slack, right? So I'd say there's that issue to address first of all, and then each year when which is it Art News that does the top 200 collectors. They have an issue of the top 200 collectors, and there too, less than 20% of them listed are women. So those are like echoing the numbers we see in the wage gap across the country. So I think the problem, the problem needs to be addressed even before we get to the breakdown of collectors or of prices. It needs to be addressed at who's actually holding the wealth and the power in the first place.
I just want to throw an answer to that too, or just some added to it, is Equity Gallery doesn't play at that level. And there's a whole ecosystem that funnels up to that level, right? So I'm always about what action can I take? Like what can I do on, so we're the emerging market, we're the start, the source, right? So we're selling works at $4,000, $5,000, $2,000, $1,000, right? So, and that's where artists, and so everybody can afford that, and most people can afford that, right? So, and then when you get to the level where they're playing way up there, we all know that that's a group of friends getting together doing, as Luciana mentioned, there's unregulated securities exchange. I mean, I know what's going on there. It's nothing to do about art, right? It's about cash, right? We get it, hiding cash. So the level I'm talking about that we can impact on are our friends, right? And our connections, get out there and, if you're like an upper middle class person, so you're like, what are you buying? Who are you supporting? Like spread it out. I mean, I think we can get that out too in some way. And, I get the wage inequality, but I think everybody's suffering from that at the moment, right? It's sort of, I'm a queer dude, they always pay us less than straight guys. So anyway, that's just a thought about, as you're reaching out, everybody in the room, as you're reaching out to your network, right? Who are they and what are they doing? Where are they putting their art dollars?
Micol, I'm sure you're familiar with Wage, which offers kind of a schedule for payment and it's level appropriate. I'll look for a link and put it in the chat. I think that's a really great, I like to send that reference to friends in all levels of the art world, whether it's artists, collectors, museums, galleries, because they account for that. And they have sort of a fee schedule that they recommend for any like services, products, art, etc., which I think is really great. And it's a good way to kind of start a conversation but also to open eyes for people who may not be thinking about that, as you say, like who may not have their eyes on, you know, putting their money where in the demographics that don't usually get supported. I wonder, we have a few more minutes, and I would love to hear once more from Sheila and Diana too, if there's any thoughts. There's been a lot discussed since you presented.
Yeah, I was thinking about, this is not really my field. However, when after the National Women's Conference, a new coalition of women's arts organizations was created in 1978. One of the things they did was to confront institutions that do buy and commission art, and ask them to account for how much of the art they are buying or commissioning is done by women artists. So for example, the government's General Services Administration, which runs all government buildings that are owned or leased by the federal government. So this huge number of institutions all around the country, they buy art to hang on the walls of government buildings. And when you have an organized force that goes to the buyers who have large amounts of federal dollars and confront them and say, we don't see women artists on the walls, it can change minds and buying habits. It's the same thing about having women curators in museums. They are more open to and more likely to showcase work by less frequently showcased artists. And I think it's important to say, where are my tax dollars going? Why aren't I seeing women's art? A similar example that I saw a few years ago was, now that there are an equal number of women becoming doctors compared to men, the women got together, formed a coalition in the medical schools, and demanded of the deans, why aren't we seeing portraits of women doctors and female medical pioneers on the walls? They started an organization at Georgetown Medical School called Women on the Walls. And they demanded and got an enormous life-size portrait of Estelle Raimi, who had been a member of the faculty of the medical school, to be hung on the wall to inspire other women in medicine. So that, again, is an example of strength in numbers and holding institutions accountable for what we see everywhere on the walls. And I think you can bring about change that way, but it takes collective action.
I think those are such amazing references, Sheila. Thank you. And yeah, visibility and representation is crucial, right? You can't be what you can't see. We need to see examples. And I think, Diana, like, you're doing that. You are literally showing us, you know, like what we can be, letting us see it.
And I've been doing public art lately. I did a piece a couple of years ago, and because of COVID, it's been pushed off, but I'm working on a Percent for Art commission, which is not necessarily about, you know, having more females presented in the art world, but it is about equal access to education. And I think that public art is such a great way to get people outside of the art community involved. Because like what Micol was saying about, you know, the upper echelon being about cash exchange and investments, I really want my artwork to be, as I said earlier, about hope and awareness and to uplift people. And so public art.
And also, if we think about the monuments going down, and we are so against many of them, we also have to think what we want to see up. And we see Wangeti Mutu in the mat was amazing to see. Became part of the collection. There is, but we need to say we want more. And as Dr. Leader said, we need to persist, and then the numbers will get there, and eventually the dollars will change pockets and things will get more equitable.
Things are happening.
I see both Gosha and Micol have hands up, but I don't know if that was a like jazz hand.
That was actually hands up, if I may say something.
Please.
You know, I'm just so inspired, and it's just so wonderful to hear this conversation. I have been teaching myself in high school for 13 years in a Waldorf school system, and they are famous for education through arts. And so children study arts since my daughters were 3 years old. They started painting, watercolor painting, and that goes to every child in school learns about painting, drawing, and music and movement, regardless whether they like it or have preferences. They just get an education. And so it feels to me that education, you know, like I'm trying to ask myself a question: why people buy art? Do they invest the money? Of course, that's one thing. But oftentimes there's someone that comes to a gallery. I did this recently in our Equity Gallery. I love this little painting. I just have to have it, right? So there's something of an understanding of an artwork that you see that you just want to have it. And where is this understanding coming from, right? It's coming from education. So education, not necessarily at the top, but also from the bottom. It's a lot of work to do, you know, but places like government buildings, I love what Sheila was saying, but also schools, little, you know, lower schools, high schools, and having them be passionate about art instead of cutting down the art programs, which is what we have been famous for, right? So where can we kind of chip in so children, young people get to learn about art from different perspectives? So that's my little chip in here. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Gosha. I think I love hearing these themes of, you know, education and representation being so crucial, right? Like this, I think those have been our key themes, you know, education, representation, and organizing. I think are like my takeaways for like how we can move forward and keep fighting this fight, because we do still have a ways to go, right? Like I'm grateful that we're celebrating 50 years of Title IX, but there's also, you know, as Diana noted, like we are not all represented and protected in our Constitution yet. We're not all represented and protected in the market. So are there any other audience questions before we wrap it up? I think we're just about at time.
Just maybe one more little thing, sorry. You know, I also grew up in a communist country, and so the art in Poland, so the aspect of art had a political mode to it, and we haven't been taught much about what was going on in America at this time, because abstract expressionism was dangerous, right? So there's a dangerous in the sense of freedom. So art education, knowing about art and the expression of art is an expression of freedom. So this is where I feel is a huge field for all of us to play into and to understand the importance of art and how it affects the society and how it can change the society if we focus our attention on art and its meaning. Okay, that was the last one.
Thank you. Lucille, did you want to say anything? I see you joined us. You're muted. If you're saying something now, we can't hear you.
I don't know. I just want to say how much I enjoyed listening to everyone. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, my friends, I'm going to wrap up my part. I will hand it over to Micol and Haley and Luciana if they would like to kind of say some concluding remarks on behalf of Equity Gallery. Thank you, Diana and Sheila and Luciana, for an incredibly like provoking and enriching and just like heartening conversation over the last couple of weeks, actually, as we've been preparing for this. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you all for caring, for tuning in, for caring about the arts, for supporting, and let's persist.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I think we should give a real loud round of applause for Micol, because I think that was just to keep it all moving.
Yes, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Micol.
Collaboration, my friends.
And I just want to just end with, over in October, Haley, Luciana, and I, and Priska from Whitney Fire Gallery did an art show on Union Square, right? In celebration of an art show that was there in the 70s called the Union Square Show. And we did it to bring art, like Diana was saying, to bring art to the people. That sounds really horrible, but that's what I meant. Right? Sort of and a woman came in and she took this painting off the wall and like hugged it. And I said, you can take that home with you. And she looked at me like it was such a novel idea. And she said, really? And I said, absolutely. It's a couple $100. It's just a really good pair of heels. It's just like, and she was so overjoyed. So we can do so much too on this level. And so I'm just saying, join the curatorial workshop next year if you can, or jump into Equity Gallery. I mean, I'm not playing way up in Kevin's. I don't know how, but I do know how to really move it and shake it on the ground level. I was a young gay twink that came to New York in the late 70s, and nobody wanted to show my work, all my friends' work. And we just threw up storefront galleries in the East Village, and we were like, fuck you, we're gonna do it anyway. And they're gonna go disco dancing. So, I mean, I think, there's so much power here tonight, and, become curators. Like, don't wait for the white straight dudes to tell you if you can show or not. Like, who cares? So just build it ourselves. So that's my soapbox for tonight. And please, keep joining in. And Sheila, I mean, it was just lovely having you here, and the history was stunning. I'm so moved by where we're all headed and where we have so far to go. We have so far to go. Haley, do you want to jump in with anything, Luciana, or should we let them all go home and have their dinner?
I was just going to say, stop by Equity Gallery before July 10th to check out the show before it comes down. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a great night.